Welcome to HOA Debrief. This is what selective enforcement looks like. You are going to stop recording me. That was the first thing Deborah Gray said when I turned the corner at the mailbox cluster and found her standing there with a clipboard, a bright warning tag already printed and ready to slap on my windshield. She was tapping her smartwatch like it gave her some kind of federal authority. I work as a postal carrier in Madison, Wisconsin, and I hear all the gossip on my route, so I knew exactly who she was. Deborah Gray, Election Committee Chair for the Brookhaven Greens Association. The woman who could manipulate ballots and proxies like a card sharp at a casino table. She had a blonde chin-length bob with a side part, a red windbreaker zipped up tight even though it was a warm afternoon, and a black baseball cap pulled low. She was holding a tabbed evidence binder with no readable text on the cover, and she was shoving it into frame so hard I had to step back to keep it from hitting my face. "I do not negotiate with violations," she said, and that line hit me like a slap. I had heard her say it before, years ago, when she went after my neighbor for a mailbox that was 6 inches too far from the curb. The Brookhaven Greens Association was one of those places where normal life becomes an enforcement opportunity. And Deborah had turned selective enforcement into an art form. She was claiming I owed a reinspection fee for an inspection that never happened. I had never missed a deadline, never skipped a hearing, never ignored a notice. But here she was, telling me the HOA had a record of a missed compliance check from 3 years ago. And now they were adding escalating daily fines that reset every time I tried to comply. My elderly father had just moved in with me after a health scare, and the stress was already making everything harder. I did not need this. I asked her to show me the original notice. She flipped open the binder and pointed to a page that had my address on it, but the date looked wrong. The ink was a different shade. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, and that was when she lunged forward and tried to grab it out of my hand. "You are recording without my consent," she said, even though we were standing in a public parking lot in broad daylight. A rideshare driver was waiting in his car about 20 feet away, windows down, and I saw him roll his eyes and shake his head. He had seen this kind of thing before. Deborah did not care. She kept talking, her voice getting louder. The bylaws were old and therefore irrelevant, she yelled, which made zero sense because she was the one citing them. But that was how she operated. She would invoke the rules when it helped her and dismiss them when it did not. I decided right then that I was going to reopen this case. 3 years ago, another homeowner had been hit with the same reinspection fee scam, and he had paid it just to make it go away. I remembered the story because his wife had told me about it on my route. She said the HOA claimed they had done an inspection, but no one had ever shown up. They had photos, but the photos were staged. The homeowner had fought it for a while, then gave up because the legal fees were piling up. Now Deborah was running the same play on me, and I was not going to let it slide. I told Deborah I wanted a copy of the inspection report. She said it was in the portal. I said the portal was down and I needed paper proof delivered in person today. She smiled like she had just won something. She said the HOA could provide it, but there was a records request fee. $25. I asked when that fee had been added to the bylaws. She tapped her smartwatch again and said it was always there, I just had not been paying attention. That was the moment I knew she was lying. I had read the bylaws front to back when I bought my place. There was no records request fee. But I did not correct her lie, because I wanted her to commit to it in public. I needed her to dig herself in deep enough that she could not climb out later. I said I would pay the fee. She said it had to be a cashier's check, no personal checks, and I had to submit it by end of business today. It was already 4 in the afternoon. The bank closed at 5. I drove straight to the bank, got the cashier's check, and brought it back to the HOA office. Deborah was not there. The assistant manager, a tired-looking woman named Carla, took my check and gave me a receipt. I asked for the inspection report. She looked confused. She pulled up my account and said there was no inspection on file. I showed her Deborah's binder page on my phone. Carla frowned and said she would look into it. 2 days later, I got a notice in the mail. It was a letter claiming I had missed a hearing I was never told about. The hearing had supposedly happened last week, and because I did not show up, the HOA was moving forward with enforcement. The notice included a lien threat that included bogus legal fees and an invented enforcement surcharge. The total was over $2,000. I called Carla. She said she had escalated my case to the management company, but they were backed up. She could not give me a timeline. That was when I started digging. I went back to the old case from 3 years ago. I reached out to the homeowner's wife, and she gave me a box of documents her husband had saved before he died last year. Inside, I found a vendor email admitting Karen asked them to change a date on paperwork. The vendor was a landscaping company that did the HOA's seasonal inspections. The email was short and direct. It said Deborah had called them the day after the homeowner complained and asked them to backdate the inspection report to make it look like they had visited the property on the original date. The vendor had refused, but Deborah had threatened to fire them. They did not backdate the report, but they also did not report her. They just kept quiet and hoped it would blow over. I had my first real clue. I made copies of everything and put the originals in a safe place. Then I uploaded the email to my own cloud account, because I had a feeling my portal uploads were about to mysteriously fail. And I was right. The next time I tried to log into the HOA portal, I got an error message. I called tech support. They said my account was locked due to suspicious activity. I asked what activity. They said they could not discuss it. I asked how to unlock it. They said I had to submit a written request to the board. Deborah was on the board. I reached out to my neighbor who had caught Karen on doorbell video at night near my property. His name was Luis, and he lived 2 doors down. He told me he had footage from about a week ago. It showed Deborah walking up my driveway around 11 at night, taking photos of my house with her phone, and then walking back to her car. She did not knock. She did not leave a notice. She just took pictures and left. Luis said he had not thought much of it at the time, but now it made sense. She was gathering evidence for a violation I did not know existed yet. I asked Luis to send me the footage. He did. I saved it to 3 different places. Then I started building a timeline. I printed out every email, every notice, every receipt. I went through the HOA minutes from the last 5 years and found a pattern. Deborah had targeted at least 6 other homeowners with the same reinspection scam. Every time the HOA claimed an inspection had been missed, demanded a fee, and then escalated to fines and liens when the homeowner pushed back. Every time the homeowner either paid or moved. No one had ever beaten her. But I was not going to pay. I had a trump card, and I was holding it until the right moment. The vendor email was good, but it was not enough on its own. I needed something that tied Deborah directly to the scheme, something that showed intent and coordination. And I found it. Buried in the old homeowner's documents was a management company internal note admitting the violation was fabricated. The note was from the previous management company, before they had been fired and replaced. It was a single page, typed and signed by the compliance director at the time. It said Deborah had pressured them to issue a violation notice even though no inspection had been scheduled, and they had refused. Deborah had gone around them and printed her own notice using HOA letterhead. The management company had documented it, but they had not reported it to the board because Deborah was the board. I had everything I needed, but I was not ready to show my hand yet. I wanted Deborah to escalate one more time. I wanted her to commit to her lie so publicly and so aggressively that the management company would have no choice but to act. I did not have to wait long. The next day I got a call from a tow company. They said my car was flagged for removal. I asked why. They said unauthorized parking. I said I was parked in my own assigned spot. They said the HOA had reported it as abandoned. I asked for the authorization paperwork. They said they would send it over. When I got the paperwork, it had Deborah's signature on it. She had claimed my car had been parked in the same spot for more than 72 hours, which was a violation of the parking rules. but I had driven my car to work that morning and parked it when I got home. The tow company had time-stamped photos, and the photos showed my car in the same spot at 9 in the morning and again at 4 in the afternoon. I had not moved it, but I had driven it. The photos did not show that. I called the tow company back and told them the car was not abandoned. I asked them to cancel the tow. They said they needed written authorization from the HOA. I said I would handle it. Then I called Carla at the HOA office. She sounded exhausted. She said Deborah had submitted the tow request directly to the company without going through the management office. Carla said that was not allowed under the new procedures, but Deborah had done it anyway. Carla said she would try to stop the tow, but she could not promise anything. I drove to the tow yard. I wanted the authorization paperwork in person. When I got there, the dispatcher was on the phone with someone, and I could hear Deborah's voice on the other end. She was saying we can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. The dispatcher looked uncomfortable. He hung up and told me he was canceling the tow. He said the authorization did not have the right signatures and he was not going to risk his contract over it. I asked for a copy of the paperwork anyway. He printed it and handed it over. That night I put together a packet. I included the vendor email, the management company note, the doorbell footage screenshots, the tow authorization, and a timeline showing every escalation step. I printed 20 copies. I addressed them to every homeowner in the association. I was going to email the proof to every homeowner right before the meeting so she walks into it, but I also wanted hard copies in case the emails got blocked or buried. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday. It was Monday. I had 3 days. Deborah did not know what I had. She thought I was just another homeowner who would give up and pay. She was wrong. On Tuesday, I got another notice. This one said my portal account was permanently suspended due to fraudulent activity. There was no appeal process. The notice was signed by Deborah. I took a photo and added it to the packet. On Wednesday, I got a call from a vendor. It was the same landscaping company from the old email. The owner said Deborah had contacted him again. She had asked him to stage photos of my property right after my evidence was submitted. She wanted him to take pictures that showed overgrown grass and debris, even though my lawn was fine. The vendor said he had refused, and he wanted me to know. He said he was done working with the HOA because Deborah kept asking him to lie. I thanked him and asked if he would put that in writing. He said yes. He emailed me a statement that afternoon. I added it to the packet. Thursday morning, I sent the email to every homeowner. The subject line was simple: evidence of HOA fraud. I included the vendor email, the management note, the doorbell screenshots, the tow authorization, the vendor statement, and the timeline. I did not editorialize. I just presented the facts and let them speak. The meeting was at 7. I showed up at 6:30 with my printed packets. A few neighbors were already there. One of them, a retired teacher named Margaret, pulled me aside and said she had gotten the email. She said she had been targeted by Deborah 2 years ago for a fence that was supposedly the wrong color. Margaret had paid a fine and repainted the fence, and then Deborah had claimed the new color was also wrong. Margaret had given up and moved the fence entirely. She said she wished she had fought harder. By 7, the room was packed. Deborah was sitting at the front table with 2 other board members and a man I did not recognize. He was wearing a suit and had a briefcase. I found out later he was the HOA attorney. Deborah looked calm. She had no idea what was coming. The meeting started with routine business: budget updates, landscaping bids. Then Deborah moved to new business. She said there was an enforcement issue that needed to be addressed. She said a homeowner had been flagged for multiple violations, including missed inspections, unauthorized parking, and fraudulent portal activity. She did not say my name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. I stood up. I said I wanted to respond. Deborah said I was not on the agenda. I said I had submitted a records request and never received a response. Deborah said the request was pending. I said I had emails showing the request was denied without cause. The attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. She ignored him. I walked to the front of the room and started handing out packets. Deborah's face went white. She stood up and said I was disrupting the meeting. I said I was providing evidence. Margaret stood up and said she wanted to hear it. 3 other neighbors stood up and said the same thing. Deborah tried to grab one of the packets out of my hand. I stepped back. The attorney stood up and said everyone needed to calm down. He asked me to explain what I was distributing. I said it was a timeline of fabricated violations, vendor manipulation, and fraudulent enforcement. I said I had proof that Deborah had been running the same scam for at least 5 years. Deborah said I was lying. I opened my packet and pulled out the vendor email. I read it out loud. Deborah said it was fake. I pulled out the management note. I read that too. Deborah said it was out of context. I pulled out the doorbell footage screenshots. I said I had video of her taking photos of my house at 11 at night without notice or cause. Deborah said that was legal. The attorney interrupted and said it was not. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA drama where the paper trail always wins. Then I pulled out the vendor statement. I read the part where the landscaping company owner said Deborah had asked him to stage photos of my property right after my evidence was submitted. Deborah stood up so fast her chair fell over. She said the vendor was lying. I said I had his signed statement. She said it did not matter. I said it did. The attorney looked at Deborah and said they needed to take a recess. Deborah said no. The attorney said yes. He asked the board to step into the hallway. Deborah refused. The attorney said if she did not step into the hallway, he was going to resign on the spot. Deborah finally walked out, and the other 2 board members followed. They were gone for 10 minutes. When they came back, the attorney did all the talking. He said the board had reviewed the evidence and decided to refer the matter to the management company for a full audit. He said all enforcement actions against me were suspended pending the outcome. He said the HOA would reimburse me for any fees I had paid. He said Deborah would no longer have authority to issue violations or tow authorizations without written approval from the management company. Deborah stood up and said that was not what they had agreed to. The attorney said it was exactly what they had agreed to, and if she had a problem with it, she could take it up with the management company. Deborah looked at the other board members. Neither of them would make eye contact. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. Deborah walked out without saying a word. Margaret came up to me and said I had just done what she wished she had done 2 years ago. 3 other neighbors shook my hand. One of them said he had been planning to move because of Deborah's enforcement tactics, and now he was going to stay. I went home and put the packets in a file box. I knew this was not over. Deborah was not the kind of person who walked away quietly. But I had the evidence, I had the attorney's statement on the record, and I had a room full of witnesses. 2 days later, the management company called me. They said they had completed a preliminary review and found multiple procedural violations. They said Deborah had issued at least 12 enforcement actions without proper authorization over the last 3 years. They said they were working with the board to implement new oversight procedures. They said my fees would be refunded within 30 days, and my portal account would be restored. I asked if Deborah was going to face any consequences. The management rep said that was a board decision, but the company was recommending she be removed from the election committee and barred from issuing any enforcement actions. I asked if that was legally binding. The rep said the board could vote to override it, but given the attorney's recommendation, they probably would not. A week later, I got a call from Carla. She said the board had voted to accept the management company's recommendations. Deborah was off the election committee. She could still serve on the board, but she could not issue violations, authorize tows, or access homeowner portal accounts without a cosigner. Carla said it was the first time in 5 years the board had taken any disciplinary action against one of their own. I asked what happened to the other homeowners Deborah had targeted. Carla said the management company was reviewing those cases too. She said they had already identified 4 that looked like the same pattern, and they were reaching out to offer refunds and apologies. I thanked her and hung up. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, I was pulling into my driveway after work when I saw Deborah's car parked at the mailbox cluster. She was standing there with a stack of printed pages, handing them out to neighbors as they came to get their mail. I parked and walked over. She did not look at me. She just kept handing out pages. I took one. It was a flyer. The heading said Homeowner Alert, and below that was a paragraph claiming the management company was covering up financial mismanagement and that I was part of a conspiracy to take over the board. It was complete nonsense, but it was printed on HOA letterhead, and it looked official. I asked Deborah what she was doing. She said she was exercising her right to communicate with homeowners. I said she was spreading lies. She said I was free to prove her wrong. I said I already had. She smiled and said the case was not closed. I pulled out my phone and called Carla. I explained what was happening. Carla said she would call the attorney. I stayed at the mailbox cluster and watched Deborah hand out flyers for another 10 minutes. Then the attorney called her. I could hear his voice through her phone. He was not happy. Deborah argued with him for a minute, then hung up. She gathered up her remaining flyers and walked back to her car. She stopped next to me and said, "This is not over." I said it was. She said, "We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works." I said that line was not going to age well. She got in her car and drove away. That night, I got an email from the management company. They said Deborah had been issued a formal warning for distributing unauthorized materials on HOA letterhead. They said if it happened again, they would recommend her removal from the board entirely. They also said they had completed the audit of the old cases, and they were issuing refunds to 6 homeowners who had been targeted by the same reinspection scam. The total refund amount was over $8,000. I forwarded the email to Margaret and Luis. Margaret replied with a single word. Finally, Luis sent a thumbs-up emoji. A month later, the HOA held elections. Deborah ran for re-election. She lost. The vote was not even close. Margaret ran for her seat and won. The new board's first act was to pass a resolution requiring all enforcement actions to be reviewed by the management company before they were issued. The second act was to establish a homeowner complaint process with a neutral third-party mediator. I thought that was the end of it. But Deborah was not done. She started showing up at board meetings during public comment. She would read prepared statements accusing the new board of corruption and mismanagement. She would cite bylaws that did not exist. She would demand audits and investigations. The board listened politely and moved on. Then, 2 months after the election, I got a call from a process server. I had been named in a lawsuit. Deborah was suing me for defamation, claiming I had spread false information that damaged her reputation. The lawsuit also named the management company and the former board attorney. I called the attorney. He said he had expected this. He said the lawsuit was frivolous, but I needed to respond. He recommended I hire my own lawyer. I did. My lawyer reviewed the case and said it had no merit. She said Deborah was using the lawsuit as harassment, and she was going to file a motion to dismiss. 3 months later, the motion was granted. The judge said Deborah's claims were unsupported by evidence and that my statements at the board meeting were protected because they were made in good faith during a public forum. The judge also ordered Deborah to pay my legal fees. The amount was over $3,000. Deborah appealed. The appeal was denied. She filed another appeal. That one was denied too. My lawyer said we could file for additional sanctions, but I told her not to. I was done. I had won. Deborah had lost her position, lost her enforcement authority, lost her lawsuit, and lost thousands of dollars in legal fees. That was enough. But the story was not over yet. 6 months after the lawsuit was dismissed, The HOA held a special meeting to address a financial discrepancy. Someone had noticed that the election committee's discretionary fund was short by almost $5,000. The fund was supposed to be used for printing ballots and mailing notices, but the expenses did not match the records. The board hired a forensic accountant to review the books. The accountant found that Deborah had been using the fund to pay for personal printing, including the flyers she had distributed at the mailbox cluster. She had also used it to pay for legal consultation fees related to her lawsuit against me. The accountant recommended the board file a complaint with the district attorney. The board voted to do it. 2 weeks later, Deborah was charged with misappropriation of HOA funds. She pleaded no contest and was ordered to repay the money plus a fine. She was also barred from serving on any HOA board in the state for 5 years. I found out about it from Margaret. She called me one evening and said the news had just broken. She said the whole neighborhood was talking about it. She said it felt like justice. I agreed, but I also knew that justice in an HOA case was not the same as justice in a criminal case. Deborah was not going to jail. She was not even losing her house. She was just losing her power, and for someone like her, that was the worst punishment of all. A year after the lawsuit was dismissed, I was walking my mail route when I saw Deborah's house was for sale. The sign went up on a Monday. By Friday, there was a sold sticker on it. Margaret told me later that Deborah had moved to a condo in another part of the city. No HOA. I never saw her again. But I still think about that day at the mailbox cluster when she tried to hand out those flyers. I think about the way she looked at me when I said her line was not going to age well. I think about the way her face changed when the attorney called and told her to stop. And I think about the moment at the board meeting when I handed out the packets and watched her realize she had been caught. That moment was worth every hour I spent building the case. It was worth every dollar I spent on legal fees. It was worth every sleepless night wondering if I was doing the right thing. Because in the end, I did do the right thing. I gathered the evidence. I built the timeline. I presented it as a timeline so the facts are undeniable even to people who hate drama. And I forced the HOA to hold one of their own accountable. The management company locked enforcement tools behind approvals so Karen cannot issue threats on her own. The HOA attorney forced a reversal to reduce liability. And Karen's own selective enforcement got documented in the minutes. But the best part, the part that still makes me smile, was the funny karma moment at the final parking lot showdown. I had printed out packets for every neighbor who showed up. Deborah had her own packet, a thick stack of bylaws and policy sheets she had printed to defend herself. She was waving it around, shouting about procedure and authority, when a sudden gust of wind hit the parking lot. Golden hour glare and long shadows stretched across the pavement. The wind grabbed her packet right out of her hands. Pages went everywhere. She tried to grab them, but they kept scattering. Neighbors were watching. Some were recording. One of them, a guy named Tom, started picking up pages and handing them back to her. She snatched them out of his hand without saying thank you. That image, Deborah scrambling in the parking lot trying to catch her own printed rules while everyone watched, was the perfect ending to the case. She had spent years using paperwork as a weapon, and in the end, the paperwork turned on her. I kept one of those scattered pages. It was a bylaw sheet about parking enforcement. I framed it and hung it in my garage. Every time I look at it, I remember that moment. I remember the look on her face when the wind took her packet. I remember the neighbors laughing. I remember feeling, for the first time in months, like I had won. And I had. Not just the case, but the war. Deborah was gone. The HOA had new leadership. The enforcement process had real oversight. And the neighbors who had been targeted in the past got their money back. It was not a perfect ending. Deborah never apologized. She never admitted what she had done. She just moved away and pretended it never happened. But I did not need her apology. I had something better. I had a written reversal from management with a real citation. I had the vendor emails. I had the doorbell footage. I had the forensic accountant's report. I had a stack of evidence that would follow her for the rest of her life if she ever tried to pull this again. And I had the satisfaction of knowing that I had reopened a cold case, connected the clues, and caught the culprit. That was enough. The new board held their first annual meeting 6 months after the election. Margaret invited me to speak during public comment. I declined. I had said everything I needed to say at that original meeting. But I did attend. I sat in the back and listened. The board approved a new enforcement policy. They approved a transparency initiative that required all enforcement actions to be posted online within 24 hours. They approved a whistleblower protection policy for homeowners who reported board misconduct. It was everything I had hoped for when I started this case. And it happened because I refused to give up. I refused to pay the fake fees. I refused to let Deborah move the goalposts. I refused to let the HOA bury the evidence. I also had help. Luis gave me the doorbell footage. The landscaping vendor gave me the emails and the statement. Margaret stood up at the meeting and demanded I be heard. Carla escalated my case even when it would have been easier to ignore it. The attorney did his job and held the board accountable. And my father, who was living with me through all of this, gave me the strength to keep fighting. He had been through his own battles with bureaucracy and bad actors, and he told me early on that the only way to win was to outlast them. Be more patient, be more thorough, be more stubborn. And that is exactly what I did. The final piece of the story came a year later. I was on my mail route when I saw a new family moving into Deborah's old house. I introduced myself and welcomed them to the neighborhood. They asked me about the HOA. I told them it was under new management and things were a lot better now. They looked relieved. Later that week, I saw the husband at the mailbox cluster. He said he had heard stories about the previous owner and the HOA drama. He said he was glad it was over. I told him it was not completely over, but it was better. I told him if he ever had a problem, he should document everything, save every email, and never assume the HOA was acting in good faith. He laughed and said that sounded like hard-won advice. I said it was. And that is the truth. This case taught me that HOAs operate on the assumption that most people will not fight back. They count on homeowners being too tired, too busy, or too intimidated to challenge them. They count on people paying the fees and moving on. And for years, that strategy worked. Deborah targeted homeowner after homeowner, and every one of them gave up. But I did not. And because I did not, the HOA had to change. The management company had to implement real oversight. The board had to adopt new policies. And the neighbors who had been silent for years found their voices. I still live in the same house, I still work the same mail route, and I still see the same neighbors every day. But things are different now. People say hello. They ask questions. They share stories. And when someone gets a notice from the HOA, they call me first. Not because I am a lawyer or an expert, but because I fought back and won. And that gives them hope. Hope that they can fight back too. Hope that the system can change. Hope that one person with a stack of evidence and a refusal to quit can make a difference. And that is the real ending to this story. Not the lawsuit, not the refunds, not the new policies. The real ending is the culture change, the shift from fear to accountability. The knowledge that the HOA is not untouchable. Deborah thought she could run the same scam forever. She thought no one would challenge her. She thought the bylaws and the procedures and the enforcement threats would be enough to keep people in line. And for years, she was right. But then she targeted the wrong person. She targeted someone who had the time, the documents, the witnesses, and the stubborn refusal to let it go. She targeted someone who knew how to build a case, how to present evidence, and how to force a public reckoning. And in the end, that made all the difference. So if you are reading this and you are dealing with an HOA that is out of control, here is my advice. Document everything. Save every email. Take photos. Record conversations where legal. Get witness statements. Build a timeline. And do not stop until you have enough evidence to make your case undeniable. Then present it. Not in private. Not in a phone call. In public. At a board meeting. In front of neighbors. On the record. Make them respond. Make them justify their actions. Make them own the consequences. And if they refuse, escalate. Go to the management company. Go to the attorney. Go to the state regulatory board. Go to the media if you have to. But do not quit. Because if you quit, they win. And if they win, they will do it again. To you, to your neighbors, to the next person who moves in. But if you fight, you have a chance. A real chance. Not just to win your case, but to change the system. To hold the HOA accountable. To make sure the next person does not have to go through what you went through. And that is worth every hour, every dollar, and every sleepless night. I will be back soon with another one.